You clicked because you drive a motorway. Maybe you drove one today. And somewhere out there a camera just watched you do something you have done for 30 years without a second thought. Here is the part that should stop you cold. The rules changed. Quietly. And the fine now lands before a single officer ever speaks to you. No warning, no wave to pull over, just a letter through your door and money gone from your account. I am going to show you exactly what changed, exactly how the fines are triggered, and the one old habit that now costs the most drivers the most money. Stay with me, because near the end I will show you a two-word phrase written into the official highway code that most drivers have never read once in their lives, and understanding it can save you hundreds of pounds. And every bit of this works with the car you already own and the roads you already drive. Let me tell you where this started for me. I remember the exact stretch. The M6, heading north, somewhere past Junction 16, a wet Tuesday afternoon a couple of winters ago. Traffic slowed. Up ahead, over the lane on my right, one of those big overhead signs lit up with a red cross. I did what I had always done. I glanced at it, decided the lane looked perfectly empty and perfectly fine, and I stayed right where I was and kept rolling along at a steady pace. Nothing happened. No siren. No flashing lights in my mirror. I felt clever, if I am honest. I thought that Red Cross was a suggestion for other people. I was wrong. I was so wrong that it took me 2 more years and a very unwelcome envelope to understand just how wrong I had been. Because that Red Cross was not talking to other people. It was talking to me. And the thing watching me obey it or ignore it was not a police car. It was mounted on the gantry itself, staring down, recording, and it did not need to chase me to catch me. I spent most of my life driving the confident, casual way, the way my father drove, the way everyone I knew drove. Sit in whatever lane feels comfortable, keep close to the car in front so nobody cuts in, treat the signs overhead as friendly advice. For decades that was normal, and for decades it mostly went unpunished, because catching a driver in the act required an officer to physically be there, see it, and pull you over. Most of the time, there simply were not enough officers. That is the whole secret to what changed. Not the rules alone, the watching. The enforcement stopped needing a human being standing at the roadside. And once the watching became automatic, every old lazy habit turned into a standing invoice with your name already on it. So let me walk you through what actually took effect, one piece at a time, because each piece catches a different kind of driver, and I promise at least one of these is a thing you did this week. Start with that Red Cross, because that is the one that got its teeth first. For years, the red X displayed over a motorway lane meant the lane was closed. Everybody sort of knew that. A breakdown ahead, an accident, debris. Maybe a poor soul standing beside a dead car with no hard shoulder to hide on. The red X meant get out of that lane and leave it empty for the people who need it. The recovery trucks, the ambulances, the fire crews. And for years, huge numbers of drivers ignored it. Highways England, the body that ran the motorways, ran surveys, and found that on some stretches, staggering numbers of drivers were still barreling along in a lane that had been closed with a red cross. Why? Because the lane looked empty. Because nothing bad had happened to them yet. Because there was no officer there to stop them. Here is what changed, and here is the date that matters. From around the middle of 2019, and rolling out steadily after, new cameras were switched on specifically designed to detect vehicles driving under a red X. These are not the old gray speed cameras you learned to spot years ago. These sit up on the overhead gantries, and they automatically read your number plate the instant you pass beneath a lit red cross in that lane. There is no chase. There is no officer. The system logs your plate, and the penalty comes to the registered keeper of the vehicle. That is you. The fixed penalty is £100 and 3 points on your license, and if it goes further, it can climb higher and take you to court. £100. 3 points. For rolling under a red cross on an empty-looking lane, exactly the way I did on the M6 that wet Tuesday, feeling clever. Now here is what I did not understand back then, and what almost nobody stops to think about. That lane is not closed to annoy you. Behind that red cross, out of your sight around the bend, there is often a person, a broken-down driver, a recovery worker, a police officer. On the older motorways, there was a hard shoulder for them to stand on. On the newer stretches, there frequently is not. The empty lane is their only shield. When you drive through it because it looks clear, you are removing the only thing standing between them and a car doing 70 miles an hour. So the fine stings. But the reason behind it is not a trick. That is the part that turned my anger into something quieter. I was ready to be outraged that they were photographing me for using an empty lane, and then I understood what the empty lane was actually for. But the red X is only the first piece, and honestly, it is the one most people have at least half heard about. The next one is quieter, older, and it catches far more of us. Because this one is not about a closed lane at all. It is about the lane you sit in every single day. Let me ask you something. When the motorway is clear, which lane do you drive in? Be honest. A great many drivers, once they have overtaken, simply stay in the middle lane. Not the left lane, the middle. They sit there, cruising, mile after mile, with the entire left lane sitting empty beside them. Maybe you do it. For most of my driving life, I did it. It felt safer. It felt like I would not have to keep pulling in and pulling out. It felt like the sensible place to be. It is not, and it never was. And here is the history that stunned me when I finally looked it up. The rule that you should return to the left lane after overtaking is not new. It is not some modern invention dreamed up to catch you out. It goes right back to the foundations of British motorway driving. When the first stretch of British motorway opened, the Preston bypass in December of 1958, and then the M1 the following year in 1959, the whole principle was built on keeping left unless overtaking. The left lane was the driving lane. The lanes to the right were for passing, and passing only. The highway code has said this for generations. You keep to the left. You use the middle and right lanes to overtake, and then you move back. Sitting in the middle lane with an empty lane on your left has a name. Middle lane hogging, and it was always against the rules. So what changed? The change came in 2013. That was when middle lane hogging, along with tailgating, was formally made an offense you could be fined for on the spot as careless driving. The penalty set out at that time was £100 and 3 points on your license, issued by police as a fixed penalty, without you ever going near a courtroom. Now, for years the honest truth is that enforcement was patchy, because again it needed an officer to see you and stop you. But that is exactly the thing that has been shifting. Forces have run targeted operations, sometimes using unmarked high-sitting cabs, lorry-height vehicles, where an officer can film down into cars and see precisely what drivers are doing. The technology and the will to enforce the boring, everyday offenses has grown. The middle-lane cruiser who felt invisible for 40 years is not invisible anymore. I tested the correct way for a month. Keep left, genuinely left, overtake, and come back. And I will tell you what I expected. I expected it to be exhausting, weaving in and out, constantly changing lanes, more stressful than just sitting in the middle. What actually happened surprised me. On a clear motorway, I was in the left lane most of the time, calm, with the whole road opening up ahead of me. When I did need to overtake, I moved out, passed, and moved back, and it took a fraction of the effort I imagined. The traffic behind me flowed. Nobody was stacking up behind me, flashing, frustrated, forced to undertake me on the inside, which is itself dangerous and something the hoggers cause without ever realizing it. The middle lane habit does not just risk a fine. It is one of the biggest causes of congestion and frustration on our motorways, because one hogger in the middle lane effectively turns a 3-lane motorway into a 1-lane crawl for everyone stuck behind. You were not being safe. You were being the problem. That was a hard thing for me to accept about myself. So that is 2 habits that now cost money: the red cross and the middle lane. But if you think those are the ones catching the most drivers right now, you would be wrong. Because there is a third change, and this one reached right into the thing sitting in your hand, or your cup holder, or your lap, at this very moment. Let me tell you about the phone law, because this is the one where people are getting caught who genuinely believe they were doing nothing wrong. For years, the law on using a mobile phone while driving had a loophole in it big enough to drive a lorry through. The law was written around the idea of communication, calling, texting. The wording meant that clever drivers and clever lawyers could argue that if you were doing something on your phone that was not technically calling or texting, you were in a gray area. People were filming, scrolling, playing, checking things, and walking away from it. That loophole is gone. From the 25th of March 2022, the law was tightened so that it is now illegal to hold and use a phone while driving for virtually any reason at all. Not just calls and texts, taking a photo, filming, scrolling through your playlist, playing a game, checking the time. If it is in your hand and you are behind the wheel, even stopped at traffic lights, even crawling in a jam, you are breaking the law. And the penalty is not gentle. It is 6 points on your license and a fine of £200. 6 points. Think about what that means. A new driver who passes their test and picks up 6 points within the first 2 years loses their license entirely and has to start again from scratch. And any driver who reaches 12 points within 3 years faces a ban. 2 glances at a phone, spaced out over time, and you could be walking. Here is the detail that catches people. Stopped at a red light counts. Sitting in stationary traffic counts. Queuing at a toll counts. Your engine is on. You are in charge of the vehicle. The phone is in your hand, and that is enough. The old excuse, "but I was not even moving," does not save you. I will admit, this one changed my behavior more than any fine ever could, because the numbers frightened me. 6 points is half a ban from a single moment of weakness at a red light. I now put the phone somewhere I physically cannot reach it while I drive. In the glove box. In a bag on the back seat. Out of sight, out of reach, out of temptation. Because the honest truth about a phone is that willpower fails, and the only thing that does not fail is distance. Now, I promised you I would not just list rules and frighten you. I want to be fair, because there is one thing you are still allowed to do, and knowing it matters. You can use a phone hands-free, mounted properly in a cradle, for navigation or a call, as long as you are not holding it. And there is one narrow exception where you can hold it, to make a genuine emergency call to the emergency services when it is unsafe to stop, or to make a contactless payment at a toll or a drive-through while stationary. But hold it to check a message, and you have handed them £200 and 6 points. So now we have 3 habits turned into fines, and here is where I have to tell you the thing I did not want to accept, the thing that took my mild irritation and turned it into something closer to a slow, cold understanding. None of this is really about the individual rules. The rules mostly are old. Keep left is from the 1950s. Do not hog the middle lane. That was written into the code generations ago. Do not drive under a closed lane. Obvious. Do not stare at a phone. Obvious. What changed is who is watching, and how they are watching, and how quietly the watching arrived. For most of the history of our motorways, the deal was unspoken but real. The rules existed, but enforcement needed a human being. That meant enforcement was rare, and drivers built their entire habits around the rareness. We all became a little casual, because casual was almost never punished. The gap between the written rule and the enforced rule was enormous, and every one of us lived comfortably inside that gap for decades. Then the gap closed. Cameras that read your plate under a red X. Cameras and unmarked observation vehicles for lane discipline. Tightened phone law with heavy points. Average speed cameras that no longer clock you at one point, but measure your speed across an entire stretch of miles. So the old trick of braking for the camera and flooring it afterwards does nothing at all. The enforcement went automatic, patient, and everywhere. And it did it without most drivers updating a single one of their habits. That is the trap. Not that the rules are unfair, that the rules were always there, but the world quietly rebuilt itself so that breaking them is now caught, logged, and billed, while most of us are still driving the way we learned in 1980-something. And there are people who benefit from you not knowing. Let me be careful and honest here. A speeding fine, a lane fine, a phone fine, every one of those is revenue. Camera enforcement is far cheaper to run than paying officers to sit at the roadside, and it generates income. I am not going to tell you it is a grand conspiracy, because it is not. But I will tell you this plainly. Nobody sent you a friendly letter explaining that the watching had changed. Nobody ran a big campaign to update the habits of a 58-year-old driver who has done nothing differently since the Thatcher years. The change in enforcement was loud in the budget meetings and silent on your driveway. And that same silence follows you long after the motorway, right into the moment a repair quote lands on the counter or a dealer slides a trade-in number across the desk. Nobody warns you there either. That is exactly why the author put together the Complete Engine Intelligence Library, delivered straight to your email as a PDF. Reset shows you the cheap habits that push an engine past 200,000 miles, from the oil protocol to the cooling checks that catch the failure nobody sees coming. Deep Leverage hands you the dealer moves you were never supposed to know, so you can read the auction sheet before the dealer does, and stop leaving real money on the table at trade-in time. And the Field Edition ties all three manuals together with a 30, 60, 90-day action plan, so you start on day one, not someday. Here is something you can check tonight for nothing. They claim 557 pages of real content, so open the first manual the minute it hits your inbox and count the sections yourself before you trust a single word. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description, or the pinned comment. And the reason it matters now is simple. Your next repair or trade-in is coming, whether you are ready or not. Now, back to the road, because I promised you something at the very start, and I keep my promises. And the silence costs you. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, and this next part is for you especially. You are thinking, this is all very well, but I am not made of money. I cannot afford some fancy dashcam system or a new car with lane assist and all the beeping technology, so what am I supposed to do about any of this? I want you to hear me clearly. Everything I am about to tell you costs nothing, not a penny. You already own everything you need, because what you need is not equipment. It is 3 small changes to what your hands and eyes already do every time you drive. Here is the first, and start it this very week. The moment you finish overtaking, count to 3, check your left mirror, and move back into the left lane. That is it. Do not sit in the middle. Do not sit in the right. Make the left lane your home, and treat the others as rooms you only visit to pass someone. Within a week, it becomes automatic, and every mile you spend correctly positioned is a mile you cannot be fined for hogging, and a mile the drivers behind you silently thank you for. The second costs nothing and takes 10 seconds before you turn the key. Put your phone out of arm's reach. Not face down on the seat beside you, because face down beside you is still within reach, and reach is the enemy. Glove box. Back seat. Boot if you must. If you are expecting an important call, set up the hands-free before you move, mount it in a cradle, and never touch it again once the wheels are turning. Distance beats willpower every single time, and distance is free. And the third, which is the one that quietly saves the most money of all. When you see one of those overhead signs light up, do not read it as advice. Read it as an instruction with a camera attached. Red cross above your lane, you move out of that lane at the next safe chance, every time, no judging whether it looks empty, because the camera does not care what you judged. A speed shown on the gantry, that is now the limit, not a suggestion, and it is very often camera enforced on the stretch ahead. Treat every lit sign as though an officer is standing directly beneath it, because in effect, one now is. None of that costs money. All of it starts this week, and every bit of it works in the car sitting on your drive right now, whether that car is 2 years old or 20. But I promised you something at the very start, and I keep my promises. I told you about a 2-word phrase written into the official highway code that most drivers have never read even once. A phrase that can save you real money, and frankly, might one day save your life. This is the part almost nobody knows, and it comes straight out of the code itself. Here is the story of it, because it deserves the telling. In January of 2022, the highway code was updated with the biggest set of changes it had seen in years. Most of the noise at the time was about pedestrians and cyclists and priority at junctions, and that is what made the news. But buried in those same changes was something aimed squarely at the motorway driver, and it introduced a phrase that had never been official guidance in quite this way before. The phrase is this: the 2-second rule. Now, you may think you have heard of following distances. You may think you know to leave a gap. But here is what the code actually tells you to do, precisely, and here is why almost nobody does it. On a dry road, you should keep a gap of at least 2 full seconds between your car and the vehicle in front, and it gives you the method to measure it. A method so simple you can do it right now on your next journey with nothing but your own voice. You pick a fixed point on the road ahead, a bridge, a sign, a marker post. When the car in front passes that point, you start counting, and the old memory-friendly way to count 2 seconds is to say a phrase that takes exactly 2 seconds to speak. Only a fool breaks the 2-second rule. You say those words at a normal pace, and if you reach the fixed point before you finish saying them, you are too close. You are tailgating, whether you feel like it or not. You drop back until you can say the whole phrase before you arrive at the marker. And here is the part that turns this from a nice tip into the most valuable thing in this entire video. In the wet, you double it. 4 seconds. In ice or snow, you make the gap up to 10 times larger, because your stopping distance is not a fixed thing. On a wet road, it can double. On ice, it can be 10 times longer than on dry tarmac. The gap that keeps you safe in July will pile you into the car in front in November. Why does this save you money? 2 reasons, and both are real. First, tailgating, driving too close, is itself a fixed penalty offense, the same 100 pounds and 3 points as the middle lane, and it is now actively enforced on many motorways, with cameras that measure the gap between vehicles automatically. That is right. There are systems that photograph tailgaters based purely on how close they are running to the car ahead. The driver who sits 2 feet off the bumper in front thinking it stops people cutting in, is now a photographed offender. Second, and this is the one that matters more than any fine, the vast majority of motorway pileups, the nose-to-tail crashes that write off cars and injure people and send insurance premiums through the roof for years, come from following too close to stop in time. The 2-second rule is the single cheapest piece of safety equipment ever invented, and it costs nothing, and it fits every car ever made, and almost nobody uses it. I tested it, of course, because I test everything before I trust it. I had always thought I left a decent gap, so I picked my marker, a motorway bridge, and I said the words as the lorry ahead of me passed under it. Only a fool. That was as far as I got before my own bonnet reached the bridge. Only a fool. I had been driving my entire adult life at barely a fraction of the safe distance, completely convinced I was a careful driver. I nearly stopped the car at the next services. I was that shaken by it. All those years, all that luck. Now I count. Every journey. And when it rains, I count to 4, and my knuckles are not white anymore, because I have given myself the one thing that no camera and no fine and no clever gadget can give you. Time. Room to react. The oldest, simplest, most forgotten piece of driving wisdom there is, written plainly into a document that has existed for generations and updated in January of 2022 for a world that had forgotten how to keep its distance. That is the secret. It was always there. It sat in the highway code while a whole nation of drivers crept closer and closer to each other's bumpers, and somebody kept writing it down, edition after edition, hoping we would read it. Now you have read it. Now it is yours. So let me leave you with the thing that really matters, and it is not the fines. For most of my life I drove on borrowed luck, mistaking the absence of punishment for proof that I was doing it right. The rules were never the enemy. My own comfortable habits were the ones I never questioned because nothing had gone wrong yet. What was taken from us was not money. It was the simple, unglamorous knowledge of how to drive the way the road was actually built to be driven, and the quiet moment where somebody should have sat us down and told us the watching had changed. If you are the kind of person who would rather know the truth than keep paying for a habit nobody warned you about, then you already understand why this matters. You do not like being caught out, and you do not like being sold a fine dressed up as a lesson you could have learned for free. So tell me one thing in the comments, and be honest, because I was. Which one were you guilty of? Were you a middle lane sitter like me, cruising along with the left lane empty beside you? Were you a Red Cross roller, or did you try the 2-second rule at the bridge and get a shock like I did? Tell me which, and tell me which part of the country you drive in, because I read every one of these and I want to know where this hit home. And if you believe, as I have come to believe, that too much useful knowledge gets quietly buried while the rest of us keep paying for the gap, then come along with the people here who are digging it back up, one forgotten thing at a time. Because next I want to show you the truth about smart motorways and the vanished hard shoulder, and the one thing you must do the instant your car fails in a lane with no refuge, a thing that most drivers get catastrophically wrong. You will want to know that one before you need it, not after. Before you go, one thing. What you just watched was the overview. Inside the Old Ways Society, this video continues with the full offense by offense breakdown. And if you're unsure, you can ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone, folks, just like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel anytime, no risk. Now, before you drive off, there's something else you really should know. Some cars are quietly being turned away by garages across the country. Let me show you which ones so you're not caught out. It's starting right here.